For 6 months now, we have seen killer auto sales. More of them coming in today, indicating we'll see 18 million annualized sales this year. And you've got tech outperforming, but then you meld that with the alternate reality. Weak manufacturing sector and ridiculously low labor participation rates. And that tells the story of a yin and yang economy and a recovery that you just got to call it this way. It's been too slow over the past 8 years. So we're bringing in three, what I'm calling original minds on the economy. Pete Hoekstra, he's former Republican congressman from Michigan. Don Marin is the former acting director of the Congressional Budget Office, also a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. You cannot pull the wool over his eyes when you put out your tax plans. And Peter Schiff, the CEO of Euro-Pacific Capital, always a contrarian thinker, the author of The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, we have the malaise versus the vibrancy. We've got these great auto sales numbers. That means a lot to you, Congressman Hoekstra, certainly coming from Michigan. But then by the same token, we have a very, very slow recovery. What do you need to hear from these candidates that you haven't heard yet about shaking out that blockage that is in the dam of opening up our economy to stronger days?
Well, I think Fox Business really has an opportunity to go after some of the real tough issues. You know, the question that I would ask is, the day you're sworn into office, America is going to be approaching $20 trillion of debt. Is this a problem? How are you going to fix it? And be specific about how you're going to address this looming crisis on the horizon.
You know, you'd hear a lot of these candidates, Don, say, look at my tax plan. I am cutting taxes and I am closing loopholes, and presto changeo, we are going to have a better economy. Does it always really work like that, Don?
No, I mean, it's hard to make it work, particularly when you have to get things through Congress and you see what comes out at the end. At the moment, the plans we've seen have been basically, by and large tax cuts. They continue to be large tax cuts, even if you take into account what's going to happen to the economy and a good state of the world under them. And so going back to the congressman's question, it's difficult to see what their plan is for getting debt under control.
Well, look, let me throw out, say, Chris Christie's plan or Donald Trump's plan. I'm sure you've parsed some of these. Do any of them come out so-called revenue neutral, Don?
I haven't seen one yet that comes out revenue neutral.
Okay, folks, that is breaking news, because Don Marin is right down the middle. And you worked, obviously, for a Republican president, but you were at the CBO. This is an important moment, Peter, and you look at what these people are putting forth. How would you hold these candidates' feet to the fire?
Well, first of all, Liz, you know, the cost of government is not what it taxes, but what it spends. You know, the Democrats are all about, you know, something for nothing. But Republican candidates who talk about tax cuts without corresponding spending cuts, that's the same thing. It's something for nothing. The candidates need to be asked, what government programs are they going to eliminate? What spending are they going to cut to make these tax cuts possible? Otherwise, it's just more deficits. And, you know, all these candidates, you know, they stump, and you go to their websites, they're all in favor of a balanced budget amendment. That's because none is never going to pass. As president, they're not going to be able to enact a balanced budget. I would ask these candidates, if you are president, will you take an oath now not to raise the debt ceiling or suspend it the way they just did in Congress under any circumstances, and actually force a balanced budget on Congress right now?
Well, one comes before the other, and then, of course, it starts snowballing, because then if you hit the debt ceiling, and you can't start going backwards on the budget, you've got to deal with the budget. So you've been there, Congressman. You've been there trying to get a balanced budget together. And of course, the one time we had the surplus in recent times, it was under President Clinton and a Republican Congress. Can we get that back?
Well, I remember when I first got into Congress, 1993, I talked about balancing the budget. People laughed. But by 1997, 1998, we actually got there. And we got there through a couple of steps. Number one, we actually reformed government. Republicans and Democrats worked together. We got the economy moving. We restrained spending. We cut taxes. But the most important thing is the economy grew. And as difficult as this is to believe, government started getting more revenue coming in than what it could spend. And that's why we balanced the budget. But the bottom line is, business had confidence in where we were heading long term, so they felt free to invest.
Don, is it enough to say, all right, let's tackle the tax code, which to me seems so easy? President Obama wanted to lower the corporate tax rate to 28%, and you had Paul Ryan, who wanted, back when he was running the budget, the committee, he wanted it to 25%. So can we not meet in the middle? But is that the answer? I am just questioning you, because you're the ultimate numbers cruncher. You take the emotion out. Would that be enough to stimulate the economy?
So that would definitely help, but as you said, it's something that Congress hasn't been able to do because while everyone agrees the corporate tax rate ought to come down, there's enormous disagreement about how to pay for that. And until we have some way forward on that front, it isn't going to happen.
Do you buy the, well, let's just close a bunch of loopholes? And Chris Christie was on our air saying, let's just close everything but the mortgage loophole, the mortgage write-off and charitable giving, and everything else closes. That's so easy to say, and I admire that, but you know, you've got lobbyists who are just pounding Washington, right, Don?
Right. And so, I mean, the things that people call loopholes are really broad-based tax breaks. There's no way politically you could roll back tax breaks on the individual personal code and use them as a way to pay for cutting the corporate tax rate.
Okay.
You can't raise taxes on people in order to cut taxes on multinationals. And the tax breaks that multinationals get each have their own defenders, and it turns out it's very hard to put together a list of those that you can enact in order to pay for lowering the corporate tax rate.
Peter, you have picked apart budgets. You've watched all kinds of behavior from politicians. What is the easiest thing? Because this would be my question. What is the number one thing that people could do, the candidates could do, without spending a dime of taxpayer money to stimulate the jobs growth here in the U.S.?
Well, what we have to do is stop all the artificial stimulus that has led to one bubble after another. You know, your other guest talked about the balanced budget in the 1990s.
Yeah.
That was a fantasy based on the dot-com bubble. You remember reporting on that back in the early days. I mean, the Congress was flush with revenue from a bubble that burst in 2001.
Yeah, but at the time it was real, right, Representative Hoekstra?
It was not real in longevity. People extrapolated these projections into the future. We need a real recovery. We need real jobs, not what we have now, not bubble blowing, not 0% interest rates. And we need a big restructuring of the
Yahoo
economy.
still exists, Congressman. Yeah, some of the things that did get a little frothy still are around. But do you agree with Peter? I'm sure you do not.
No, I don't. I mean, it was a real surplus. The trend lines were all moving in the right direction, and if we would have continued economic growth, continued reforming government like we did welfare, like we did the tax code, we could have sustained that recovery and moved beyond the bubble. And so, no, it was a real deficit. Government was actually working, and Washington was working in the right direction and getting things done. And we can come back to that. We can come back to that scenario.
Yeah, it wasn't real at the time when people were forecasting surpluses as far as the eye can see. I said that was nonsense. These deficits are going to come back, and they came back huge.
Well, they came back because George Bush started spending, and then Barack Obama took that baton. Correct, Donald Marin?
So it was a multiple factors. I mean, the peak forecast that showed all these surpluses were at the peak of the bubble, and when the economy turned down, that brought back deficits by itself, and then they were made bigger by tax cuts and spending.